having a positive mindset towards somebody. And we're going to get into what love looks like here in a bit, but just not being involved with them, being hands-off, that's not community. And that's what John's saying here. And for me, that was kind of shocking because I think that probably describes most churches. I mean, most churches that I've been a member of or involved in, very few people get involved in each other's lives. You have a few people you connect with. I mean, you're always going to connect with some people closer than others. But as a whole, there are very few churches where people actually are plugging into each other's lives on a daily basis and really getting to know each other and sharing and breaking bread. And so, how is this supposed to look? That's where we get into the next truth here in this passage. What does love look like? But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? So John comes out and says, look, it's not just having apathy and being closed off to people. It's being sacrificial. The first and primary way we know what love is, first and foremost, is by looking at Jesus. This should be our definition of love as Christians. Our love for each other is different and more radical than any other of society's definition of love. In society, love tends to be something that just kind of wells up and comes and goes. But with Christians, our definition of love is Christ. Look here in verse 16. By this, this version says, we know love by this, that He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. So Jesus becomes our definition of love. He gave everything for us. He poured out His blood. He gave His life. He left heaven for us. He gave up a lot. He never said, oh, well, I need to do what I need to do to take care of my business, and then, if I have time, I'll take care of you. We were first and foremost. I mean, glorifying God was first and foremost, and He glorified God through putting us before Himself. So this is the definition of love. Okay, well, what does that look like for us? Most of us in this room are not going to take a bullet for somebody in this room. I mean, I realize that can happen, especially with, the stories that you hear in the news. There's just so much angst in our country with people that are just unbalanced or upset or depressed and decide they need to resort to that. And sure, there are circumstances where somebody might take a bullet for somebody, but probably we're not going to do that here in this church. So what does it mean to lay down your life for somebody? Be willing to die for them? I think that for us, the most difficult way that this passage applies to us is having a sacrificial attitude to our fellow believers. What I mean is, we have to be willing to lay down time for each other. That's hard. A lot of times it's a lot easier to write a check. I mean, certainly that is helpful, and this passage actually points out we're to do that. If it comes down to it, and somebody's in a bind and you have enough to help them out. But I think the most difficult thing for us to give is our time. There's so many things that vie for our time. And for us to be sacrificial and to really get involved in somebody's life, that's asking a lot. It's in these lesser ways that we have to be willing to sacrifice. It's time, it's money, it's emotional wear, it's personal involvement. Those are big things. And being able to do that for somebody in the church, I mean, you're really not going to know how to help somebody. I mean, really help somebody if they're in a bind unless you know them. I mean, really know them. Not like, well, we went to school together, I kind of know them, I know what's going on in their life. I mean, like, you're sitting at a table with them and you know what's causing them to be depressed, or what's causing them sorrow, or the burdens that they have on their life and their soul. These kind of connections are the connections that we need to be striving to make with our fellow believers in Christ. That's what He's calling us to do. And that's the only way we're going to know how to help and encourage each other and truly grow close as a community. That is a display of love, is to be willing to make those sort of sacrifices to connect with one another. And that's how you know somebody really loves you. They're willing to drop everything because you've got something going on, and they just sit down and they're willing to just talk with you. This is really a difficult passage to read and hear. Because there's always going to be, there are going to be some Christians you're just going to have that connection with. Because you maybe you share some of the same life experiences, you're going through the same time in life. You have a lot of things that you can relate to them about. And so you're going to naturally have that. But there's always going to be people in the church you're not really going to know how to relate to. Maybe they're older than you or they're way younger than you, and y'all just don't have a lot in common. This is where we as Christians really have to work to demonstrate love. It's a process. It's not something that any of us arrive at. Nobody in this room has arrived at that place. We all have something to work on in that area. And that's what this passage is calling us to do, is to strive and make these connections, to display love in an outward way to people around us where they can see it. Not just we think, oh, well, I'm loving. Well, yeah, you can think that and think that you're loving towards people, but somebody, if you're not demonstrating it, you're not showing it through your actions, most people probably aren't going to be able to know that they're loved by you. Now, at this point, I could really move into some application. I know a lot of people preaching this would probably do that, but I really feel like I need to stop here and talk about how is this even possible. Because this is a high standard of love. And this is something that's difficult. It's not something that comes natural to us. Especially if we don't really relate to somebody in the church, or we have a problem with somebody, or it's uncomfortable. Or at least it can be. So how is this even possible? John points out in verse 17 that if you see somebody in need and you close your heart to them, that the love of God is not really abiding in you. So what he's pointing to is not just actions that need to be done, but he's saying, look, if the actions aren't being done, there's something wrong with your heart. And so he talks about this love of God abiding in us. So what does that even mean? This is where I'm reading ahead kind of helping with this, because it's like, okay, well, what does this mean? It can mean a lot of different things, depending on who you ask. Well, what does abiding, love of God abiding in you, mean? But I'm going to read this from chapter 4, verse 19. We love, meaning Christians love because He loved us first. So if you read ahead, because this is a big theme in 1 John, is loving one another. He says we actually are able to love. We love because He loved us first. Now I think that the context shows that God's love abiding in you means living with a constant remembrance for what God was willing to do for you on your behalf in the cross. Is when you know that you're loved by God, when you think about what Jesus went through, the perfect life that He lived, He didn't have to come down here to earth. But He chose to do that out of love. He didn't have to go through the beatings and stuff that He did before He died. He could have worked things out in a certain way where He didn't have to go through the beatings. He could have just died on the cross. He could have, He had the power of God. He could have changed circumstances, but He went through that out of love for you. And He certainly didn't have to go to the cross. That was His choice. Nobody forced Him to go down Calvary Road. But He died on the cross on your behalf. He rose from the dead, demonstrating that He had accomplished the things that He had set forth to accomplish. He rose and sat at the right hand of the Father, proving His work's finished. And then in His second coming, we know that we're going to be loved. We have these promises of what He's going to accomplish for us when He comes again, what we're going to receive. And when we live in light of that has to be a daily thing. When we live in light of that begins to change our heart. Now, if your heart's not being changed by that on a daily basis, you're not digging deep enough into it. As Christians, we're always supposed to be digging into Jesus' work for us, the gospel. That's not something that you get when you first become a Christian and then you kind of move beyond that. The gospel is a central idea that only, if you're going to grow spiritually, it's going to come out of having a deeper understanding of the gospel. It's not just something for non-Christians. It's something for us as Christians. Whenever we live in light of the gospel, the person and work of Jesus Christ on our behalf.